Welcome and thank you for joining me in the Business 7 studio, where we have a packed program for you this week. Everybody's wondering how Namibia is going to fund its record high deficit. Now you might get some of your answers there in Allan Gray's insert at the end of the program, Gray Matters, where Managing Director James Mnyupe talks to a representative of the Bank of Namibia on or about possible solutions and options. We also have the representative of PwC Namibia. Now she is going to talk to us about a very interesting concept. It is, they call it the downsizing survivor syndrome. And it's all about employees that survive a retrenchment process and what the psychological impact on those lucky ones, so-called lucky ones, are who have to carry on in an organization. Also stay tuned for an insert on tourism. Tourism is one of the sectors that have been the most affected by the impact of COVID-19. We've seen mass retrenchments, we've seen businesses having to close down. We see the Bank of Namibia, expecting the sector to grow by minus 58% this year. In Biz 7 today, we talk to experts on the tourism sector, and they certainly haven't lost all hope. Yes, the recovery is going to take long, but they believe that Namibia can bounce back, provided that government and all other stakeholders take hands and fix what needs to be fixed right now. To supplement that story, my colleague on the business and economics desk, Philippus Usiku, went to visit the craft center in Windhoek, where he spoke to some of the people selling their wares or trying to sell their wares amid the absolute drought of tourists.
It was a quiet first 6 weeks, but from what we noticed, I'm not saying it's the same for everyone, but life is going on. It has to go on. It'll be a new normal. Life without tourists is difficult for a lot of people, but I think it has taught us to look beyond that, try to cater for our local markets as well. Prepare like online businesses for, eventualities like these. And I think after this movement, things will go back to a new normal, not what we knew before, definitely more precautions, but I don't think the world's going to shut down and people will stop coming to Namibia, we'll stop going anywhere. But I think it's definitely taught us how to review how we see our businesses, who we cater for, and who we want to access in terms of customership. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you.
As we are the arts craft walking by the craft market, so because there is no tourist, we are suffering a lot because of this COVID-19. It has bring us down a lot and has infected our businesses. So not only businesses, but also our incomes as well. And sometimes we come to work and we think maybe we could get something, but nothing. Sometimes we try, maybe sell once, it's a $20 thing, and that $20 you have to pay transport. And at home, kids are hungry, there's no food. And plus there's also rent involved, and it's too much as well. Rent has to be paid. Transport, water, electricity at home, it's also tough. Workplace is also tough. Sometimes you come in the morning, you think that you will get something. You just sit in the place where you are and you just stare at your walls, the things and so on. When will someone come, or when will someone, a day that you'll be lucky that you'll get? You sometimes you stay with your colleagues from morning to morning, and it's so very tough because the most incomes that comes is the most is from the tourists. That's the most comes, and now that the tourists are not coming in, it's very tough for us to survive on it. So we hope that one day, if the virus is gone, that we should have our tourists back, because only are the ones who always do the incomings in our country as well. Not just my business, but all around Namibia where we are right now. And it's very down, and we are struggling a lot. We are suffering indeed, seriously.
We're living in an era of fear, not just when it comes to health about COVID-19, but about the incredible and devastating impact it has on the socio-economic landscapes. Joining me in the studio today is Lisa Matomola. She is the manager of a people and organization at PwC Namibia. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you, John Marie.
I found you, of course, also wrote an article in B7's issue today, which is available in Republikein, Algemene Zeitung, and the Namibian Sun. And in this article, you took a very unique angle. When we think about the devastation and the impact of COVID-19 and the absolute mass retrenchments that we've seen in our country, but also worldwide, one tends to immediately think about the people who have lost their jobs. And your sympathy is there. And indeed, it is terribly tragic that we are in a situation where thousands of people are losing their jobs. But you say that there is also a flip side to the coin, that the people in organizations who go through these retrenchment processes and remain behind, that they have a lot of issues that they have to deal with. Please tell us more about that.
Thank you once again. As you have mentioned, those that have received the news that they have been retrenched, they already have their fate determined. They can easily start deciding on what to do next. However, those that are left behind, they are left with more questions as to what is next. So if there is no proper communication and there isn't more understanding in terms of the next step within the organization, the employees start to feel worried. They start to have more questions than those that have left behind. So you find that they become more stressed, they become more worried. They also worry about the colleagues that have left. They worry about the colleagues. They start asking in terms of the duties that have been done by their fellow colleagues. Who's going to do it now? I've already, I'm doing so much. I leave home maybe at 7 every day. I have kids to take care of. Who's going to do this next person's responsibilities? They can also be questioning in terms of, will my salary increase if I take on these new responsibilities? Questions around, will we get bonuses? What is next? And how is it that Jo Marie was retrenched and she was good at her job, actually maybe average? What was the process? What was taken through? What were the procedures in terms of deciding who should leave and who should remain behind? So a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty remains with the employees that are not retrenched. So they develop what we call downsizing survivor syndrome, because they have more worries and question marks in the next step.
Yes, I have been unfortunate enough to have spoken to quite a few companies, employees at quite a few companies who have gone through this process and who have then survived or have kept their jobs. And the impact is actually quite devastating. To see a colleague of yours pack up his stuff and simply walk out the door. And as you say, there's guilt and absolute happiness that you've kept your job, and then you feel guilty because you're one of the lucky ones, and so it's an absolute psychological I see this as an octopus with psychological tentacles that are just growing all the time. You say that out of fear that they also might be, on a list somewhere, some of them also start working harder. And this whole syndrome, that would no doubt have an impact on productivity.
As you have seen in the article, the first few months or few weeks when you are informed that you have survived, you'd want to go the extra mile, you put in extra effort so that should there be another wave coming, you survive. So employees will work hard, they will double their efforts. However, that also has an effect on their physiological.
Absolutely.
We talk about burnout.
Yes, absolutely.
They'll be stressed, they'll be tired all the time. And it can affect the quality of their work, because if you are working long hours, you have so much work, the quality that you produce and the productivity can be affected. So productivity can look good in the first few months. However, as time goes, because of the emotional strain that the retrenchment or the downsizing has had on them, it can slowly affect the productivity. And companies can already see in terms of the results. If you are in sales where you use numbers, you can see that. If we are talking about organizations that don't make profit, you can see the engagement level. So employees are just there. They come to work, but we're talking about presentism. They are present, but they are not productive. So they will be at work. Instead of doing the work, they would probably rather be on social media and just check what's happening. Should I probably start looking for another job? Is this home for me? So such kind of things affect the productivity as well.
It can cause a huge problem within an organization. What do organizations do to manage this effectively?
It's also hard for organizations to take these decisions because, as you can notice, employers also love their employees.
Of course.
No one has control over the virus. It's not an easy decisions that they are taking. However, because of the impact the virus has had on the organization, they have to take this strategic decision. What is important for organizations then to do is to ensure that when they start the process, when they embark on the process, they need to inform or sensitize their staff members. So it's more on raising the awareness on how or why this is being done. It's a strategic decisions. What are the reasons? What are the objectives? You remind the organization in terms of the direction that we are taking. However, there must be support, ongoing support. We're talking about over communication. So make the employees part of the process. Make them feel involved so that they can know what's happening. Some employees will only read in the newspaper and say, oh, my organization is retrenching. So they need to see it. They need to hear it from the horse's mouth before it's even in the paper. So there needs to be that involvement. Hold my hand. We are on this journey together. Alleviate their fears. It's more of a baby and a mother type of relationship. So they shouldn't feel alone. We are here for you. What is the next steps? How are we also looking after the employees that have left? If there's any more changes, we are going to tell you. If you want to talk to somebody, if you are stressed, if you are depressed, if you want to take a day off, to just show the support and show that we are here for you. This is not also easy for us, because for leaders also to break the news, it's not really something easy.
It must certainly take a toll on them too.
Yes.
Yes, indeed, Lisa, I don't think this debate is exhausted at all. I think there's a lot of more research that's going to come from it. So we want to thank you for sharing your insights with us. That, of course, is Lisa Matomola. She is PwC Namibia's Manager of People and Organization.
Thank you.
We're going to take a look at the At Your Fingertips section in Business 7 today. With me is Romé Mostert, economist at Cirrus Capital. Welcome, Romé. You've been here many times before.
Thank you, Dani. Thank you for having me over.
Now, this whole infographic of today is about COVID-19 and 114 days of it. That 114 days in it this Sunday. Do you guys as economists look at a lot of other data and not only traditional business and finance data when you advise clients and look at the economy?
Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, you want to sit with your financial data and you want to have a feeling of where it is going, but that's always sort of backwards looking. The day you've got your financial data, it's probably, if it's monthly management account, it's 10 days old already. If it's annual accounts, it's a lot older already. And therefore you sort of try to keep track on the real economy and what's happening through all sorts of other data. And there you can sometimes have a lot more live data showing you just general trends and what's happening, like the numbers we see here. For example, we like having a look at rainfall figures and dam levels when you look at the agricultural sector. If you look at just general consumer demand, you can quickly get a feeling if you look at vehicle sales and the trends up and down, what it's looking like. And particularly when you look at the national accounts, the way it's actually assembled when you look at the real growth is actually a lot of the times not economic data or financial data. It's like actual carrots produced when you look at diamonds production and so on. And I think when it comes to things like the impact of COVID on the economy, I mean, liters of beer sold is a good indicator, although you also don't see it. And I mean, we literally had a standstill in production and consumption. There was literally no sales happening. Or legal sales, be that. So yes, so we do have a look at a lot of non-financial data as well.
We're going to have a quick look at the top part of our full-page infographic now, showing just how the situation looked by Sunday in the regions in Namibia. Now, obviously, that has changed. 107, I think, new cases in the last 2 days already. And one can clearly see that hotspot in Walvis Bay. It says there 81% of all cases at the moment in the country. It's actually now at 84%. Sure. And Irongo has 91% of all the cases in Namibia. And we've on Monday saw the new restrictions in those three coastal towns. Yep. What is the impact of that on trying to stimulate the economy when you have brand new measures all of a sudden impacting on households, businesses, etc.?
Yeah, so I mean, from the start, when we started speaking lockdowns, we said that you must never be under the false impression that it will be one lockdown and then it's done, and when we go on with our lives, it will probably a number of lockdowns that we go into and then back out, into and back out. And I think for now it's good news that it's only one region that's sort of locked down, and it's not the entire country that faces the implications. If you just think of Walvis Bay, I mean, it's got a couple of primary and secondary industries operating there. We've got fishing industries, and I think a lot of the cases are actually people coming off from the boats and so on that actually started the transmission. And those sectors will definitely be implicated. Walvis is also a big logistical hub for Namibia. It's where a lot of products come in and enter us. Also, our exports must exit through Walvis Bay. So I think just besides the local implications there, it's also got potential to have a bigger impact on the rest of the economy. And I think psychologically it also hampers with people's mood, and people keep on digging back into their savings, reserves are declining. So I think psychologically the confidence is also going a bit backwards. And I mean, Walvis has now been in lockdown for most of this whole period. And I mean, if you're 114 days in lockdown, it gets to the point where you're not that happy anymore.
Let's look quickly then at the cases. This is an exponential graphic showing the development since 14 March, and one can clearly now see how it's picking up.
Yes.
Like I said, many new cases already. And the bottom part, just if you get your issue today, that shows transport into Namibia coming from our bordering countries. So it clearly shows just how reliant we are on South Africa. Romé, this graphic that's just picking up like this, some people have the impression and feeling if you just flip it around and show it like this, it'll be a picture of the economy.
Yeah.
But that is not also not really true.
Yeah, so first of all, what an exponential trend means that you continue to grow a certain percentage points per day. Like I think at the moment, the 7-day average of new cases is about 44 new cases for Namibia each and every day for the last 7 days. And if you take it as a percentage, so currently we 44 new cases on just short of 600 total cases, which means we're growing about 7% a day. Which also means if you extrapolate it out, you can quickly see that we will probably get to 1,000 cases not quite fairly soon. And that's a problem with the exponential, and if then we're still growing with 7% on 1,000 cases, it means we're getting 70 new cases a day. And then the number quickly builds and adds up. We've seen the similar trends in the rest of the world, and then as they enter the lockdowns, we're able to flatten that curve, and the exponential growth sort of stopped. It was then more like just the same number of cases every day. And then as they open up again, you see the trend resumes. I think what the lockdowns in the rest of the world did was it enabled the governments to put new beds into place, to make sure that they've got the facilities to house the new cases and to make sure that people don't die and that the death rates stay quite low. While I'm not sure if our facilities necessarily were, if we added a significant amount of new beds that we can house patients should it be necessary. But then also I think if you look at South Africa, for example, the death rate there is, I think, probably closer to 1% of all COVID cases. If we would have had the same situation here, we already would have seen 6 or 7 cases of deaths in Namibia. And then in the rest of the world, I think it's about 4.5% of recorded cases. So I think now with 3-4 months behind us, each day we get a bit more clever on the virus, and it actually feels like the initial fear of the potential deaths that can arise from it, it's much better than we initially expected. And I think that's why it's also the hype around it is sort of quieting down a bit, and we see, despite the cases picking up, that we're keeping our economies open to an extent.
I want to show that second slide just once more, because my final question might be a difficult one. We see that long flat line where we had no cases for a very long time, and that is when we had a strict lockdown.
Yep.
Did we have a strict lockdown too quickly and for too long in terms of the economy? What's your opinion on that?
So, I mean, it's easy to now look in the rearview mirror and criticize decisions that were taken, and I think when you're making life decisions, it's always much more difficult to make the right decision. But at the point when the lockdown started, we only had 5 cases, and it was all imported, and it wasn't local transmission. And that was in March, and we knew, like, at that point already there were studies showing that whenever the temperature drops and if it's colder somewhere, the virus spreads more quicker. So at that point in time, it felt like it's preemptive, and that we will probably need to do lockdowns later on as our winter was still approaching. And we sort of, I think the economists at that point knew that the cost is devastating, and it's not really let's save lives at all costs, because we haven't, even with the pickup in cases, we haven't seen any deaths here. It comes to the point where it's like playing cards. You know, you've got that one joker in your hand, and you must play it at the right time, and then you can utilize it the correct way. And I think we missed the opportunity. We played it way too early. And I mean, it's emotional decisions when it comes to this. I mean, it's easy to talk about deaths in numbers, but if it comes to your family and close ones, then it's way more emotional, and that's also why the decision is much more difficult. But I think a simple answer is actually like, as the cases are exploding now would have been the time to say, okay, listen, let's lock down Walvis Bay, keep a close eye outside, and we could have saved the economy a lot of damage. And I mean, the problem that we sit with in Namibia, let's first look at the US. There we saw a lot of job losses in March, April, but then all of a sudden, May and June, we saw a significant resumption in people going to work, and a lot of new employment activity at the difference is that they've got a very flexible labor laws, and in Namibia, once you've appointed someone, the law is very strict, and you cannot just make someone redundant. And that's why when we made structural damage to the economy, when we laid people off, when the companies couldn't afford it anymore, they laid people off, and they're not just re-employing them because they don't know what next week in 2 months' time what this case will look like. So I think we played the card too early.
Thank you very much, Romé. That's Romé Mostert from Cirrus Capital. Let us know what you think here on Facebook with your comments, and remember to get your issue of Business 7 today.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. As usual, thank you so much for joining us on yet another episode of Booysen here at the NMH Studios, obviously in conjunction with Allan Gray. And as usual, we have Matthias driving in the background, and we'll be sharing some multimedia slides with you today to discuss in a bit more detail how it is that we fund our national government. I've done the previous 2 slides solo, but today I'm so glad to have a guest in our beautiful studio. This is Nicholas Mukasa. He's a director in the Financial Markets Department at the Central Bank. And with his help, we're going to try and delve a little bit more, as I mentioned, into how it is that we fund our country, where are we today in terms of debt, and of course, what is our borrowing strategy going forward. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thank you, James, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely, brilliant. So the idea here is to obviously bring people from the public sector to make sure that we are trying to educate our viewers as much as possible, and we're getting it from the horse's mouth, and I'm not just giving you data and details that I'm busy making up. So we're going to try and have quite a flowing conversation, so hopefully you enjoy the discussion. So Nick, to kick off, I thought we might as well just start with the basics. Could we perhaps tell our viewers what role actually does the central bank play when it tries to help the government to fund our deficit?
Okay, so James, before I go into that question, I think maybe it's always nice to take a step backwards and maybe just speak slightly around the functions of a central bank. Yeah, and I think if you look at the role of a central bank, it's well defined in the Bank of Namibia Act that was used to create the institution. So of course I won't have the time to go through each and every one of the functions. Absolutely. I'll just highlight 1 or 2. The important mandate that we have, is the one of price stability, which basically means we don't want a scenario where we see prices, running away from, from the general public and causing havoc for business and households. That is the key mandate. The second mandate is the one of financial stability, which basically means we want an environment where the institutions that operate within the domestic economy are operating, and they're stable. There's no concerns there because it can destabilize the economy. And then the other key aspect, the last one linked to your question, is the one of a fiscal advisor. So what that basically means is that the central bank, together with the government, particularly the Ministry of Finance, there's very close collaboration on anything that has to do with public finances. Absolutely. So that basically means, the issuance of debt, we play a role in that. Whether you are raising the debt domestically, even offshore, we play a role in that. We work side by side, in debt management.
Brilliant. So, Nick, for the average Joe out there and the Mrs. Chikongo who's been following B7 for the past 2 or 3 episodes, when they're watching this and they're wondering, but why do we actually borrow anyway as a nation? Could you try and elaborate as to what that particular rationale is?
Okay. There are different reasons why sovereigns, not just Namibia, go
Sure.
out there and borrow. And I'll try and talk about maybe 2 or 3 without, without specific order of importance. So the first one is, under normal circumstances, there is a natural mismatch between when revenue is received by the state, and then also the expenditure. So there's natural mismatches. And for us, you have to look at how SACU, which is a significant part of our revenue, flows through. You will see that there are months, where you don't have huge revenue, particularly outside SACU. So to balance, the cash flows, you need to borrow to complement that.
Brilliant.
So that's reason number 1. And then reason number 2 is that during times of difficulty, our countries typically run a deficit, which is where we are now. So in a time like that, you need to basically raise debt to try and finance that deficit. Yeah, the deficit will obviously finance will go through operational expenditure and then also infrastructure investments, which is what you need to get the economy going once things are up and running. And then the other reason I want to highlight is that, especially when you're going offshore, you may want to tap certain markets to create a benchmark for the private sector to also go and borrow. So there are basically different reasons why government may borrow, and those are some of them.
Brilliant. So, as I was talking to Nick, one of the things that came into mind is obviously in terms of our viewers, when Nick is talking about SACU, he's talking about the Southern African Customs Union. And that's basically a group of countries including Lesotho, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa. And between those countries, as we import goods into that union, the countries that then traditionally import typically from South Africa get some money from South Africa because of that economic activity. So that for Namibia ends up being between 30, this year it's actually 44% of revenue. So it's a big part of our revenue, but it comes in chunks. It doesn't come linearly throughout the year. And so those were the mismatches that you were talking about. So Matthias, I saw you were sort of looking at a few of the graphs, but the first one we really wanted to look at was the debt composition. Nick, can you briefly talk to us about where are we in terms of the makeup of our total debt of about 100 billion at the moment?
Yeah, as you mentioning, James, the total debt sits at about 100 billion Namibian dollars. In terms of composition, you will see that a significant part of that is financed in Namibian dollars, so that this is sourced within the domestic economy. It sits at roughly 64%.
Got it.
Yeah, and then the other part of the deficit is financed from the Euro bonds, which is, these are US dollar denominated bonds that we issued. The viewers may recall we issued the first Euro bond in 2011. Now that was a 500 million US dollars. And then we issued the second one in 2015, which was a 750 that we issued. We also raised money on the JSE. I believe we're the only country that is raising money on the JSE. We've raised some money there. And then we also raised some money from multilaterals within the region.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so this is really the composition of our debt.
Fantastic. And so Matthias, if you show the viewers that table that we put up, just to sort of show the progression of our debt over the years, sort of 2016, 2017, we were at 66 billion, we're now at 100 billion. And what our viewers can see from that table is that the foreign debt stock has gone from about 25 billion to 36, whereas the domestic has gone from 41 to 63. And so when people are looking to lend us money, Nick, what exactly do they typically take into account before they lend us money as a sovereign?
Yeah, James, this is quite strange, this question coming from someone who manages money, but I'll try and answer that question.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think the most important aspect that comes to the mind of an investor, is the one of safety. So in other words, you want to invest with a sovereign knowing that you'll get your money back.
Of course.
Yeah, because you don't want to invest and that money doesn't come back eventually. Yeah, and on this point, I just want to explain that, government has a very has a well-defined strategy of making sure that, maturing bonds are redeemed and money is paid back to the investor. So we run a redemption plan, which is a plan of how we'll basically pay back our bonds. Yeah, so that's the first part. And then the second part is the one of credit ratings, so investors will typically look at opinions around our credit worthiness. Yeah, and those opinions are provided by Fitch, by Moody's, in the case of Namibia. So they will look into that, and see what the likelihood of Namibia defaulting is.
Brilliant.
So they'll look at those factors.
You know, this is typically what we do for a living at Allan Gray, but I just wanted our viewers to get a nice objective perspective. I didn't want to put in all of our subjective pins and needles into you, at least not this early in the conversation. Later on I'll poke you a little bit, but one has to remember the central bank is obviously a very neutral player, and as Nick alluded to earlier, they're typically an advisor. It's still up to the central, to the state to decide exactly where it is that they're going to tap into. And so let's talk a little bit about that. So we saw there in our earlier table that Namibia can borrow both from local and foreign sources. What do they take into account, or what do we take into account as a country before we decide to borrow money from the Eurobond or borrow money from local institutional investors and access our pension funds? What are the two or three key things that we think about?
Yeah, I think, James, we have to look at the principle of when we're going out to borrow. So the domestic market is quite key.
Yes.
For the government. And as we showed in the previous slide, you will see that almost 2/3 of our borrowing is done in the domestic market. Yeah, and the reason for that is we want to develop the local market, the local capital market, because as you know, government is the biggest issuer in the domestic market space, and this is the reason why we issue domestically. And then the other aspect that we look at is the risk, of different markets, because if you raise domestically or if you go offshore, there are benefits and risks that one must balance. So if we want to maintain very low risk as far as FX is concerned, our preference becomes the domestic market. And then the other aspect that we look at is the cost of borrowing, because depending on different times and in different markets, the cost of borrowing can be quite different. So that is also quite important for the state, because you don't want to be in a position where your repayments are quite hefty and quite unaffordable.
Got it.
So we balance all of these factors.
Yeah. And of course the other big factor is the currency, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes when you borrow in foreign currency, and the currency moves against you as a borrower, you may end up paying back a lot more than what you borrowed. And I think that happened with the first Eurobond, where as a country we borrowed in hard currency. I think we didn't hedge a lot of it. And so the amounts that we were paying back when the rand and Namibian dollar had depreciated from 7 or 8 when we borrowed to 13, 14, 15, 16, now even 17, would obviously be a bit tough for us, especially because we'd be looking to redeem some of that next year in November. So I think as the advisor to the state going forward, obviously in terms of how it is that we hedge debt that we borrow from offshore, that'll be a big part of Nick's job. So definitely look to Nick to make sure we make the right decisions. But let you defend yourself. Yes.
Yeah. Well, James, you are quite right. That's quite an important risk one has to consider. Yeah. And I think for the first 2 Eurobond, I must also maybe mention for the sake of the viewers.
Absolutely.
We have hedged those 2 Eurobonds.
Brilliant.
Yeah. We've hedged them.
Okay.
And again, this is in realization of the fact that if you don't hedge your FX risk, it can change the outcome for the economy. It can change the outcome for our debt profile and its affordability.
Fantastic. So officially that debt has been hedged. Okay, correct. Brilliant. So now we obviously come into 2020 and 2021, the fiscal year where we all obviously got surprised by COVID. And the Honorable Minister of Finance tabled quite an expansionary budget. We're looking to fund a deficit of 21 billion. And as our viewers would recall from our previous slides, I think the deficit last year was just over 9 billion. So we're definitely looking to fund this year more than double what we funded last year. And Matthias, at this point in time, it'll be useful to bring up that borrowing plan, because this is what I want to ask Nick. The Honorable Minister of Finance went on a bit of a roadshow last week. He spoke to institutional investors. Allan Gray was one of those investors. And he had to tell the market how it is that he plans to raise, $22 billion, which is what we've put up on the screen for you viewers. Our net financing requirement is about 22 billion. And you can see what the minister said, the combination of potential financing sources could be. And this is exactly what Nick would have to do with the financial markets department at the central bank, is to advise, at least to give advice to the government in terms of how to raise this money. So Nick, why don't you talk us through some of the thinking behind this particular table we're looking at here?
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to mention is that this year is quite exceptional, as you've outlined in your question. Yeah, because we're looking nearly at twice the amount that we looked to raise last year. Yeah, so the way we're going to finance it is obviously going to be, we have to explore things that are quite new. And I think if you look at the table that is put out there for the viewers, the one thing that you'll see is that we're going to tap into our savings for this year.
Right.
Yeah, just to mitigate the amount of funding that we're looking to raise. Right. So we'll raise about $7.5 billion we'll use $7.5 billion from those savings. And then we'll ask for about $2 billion from the regional markets, so that is your multilateral, the ADBs and the IMF will look into that, and then the rest of the money will raise that from the domestic market once again. And I think this is in line with the with my earlier response to say the domestic market remains a priority for us, because we want to develop that. So we're looking to raise about $10.4 billion from the domestic market.
Fantastic. And so I suppose for any of our viewers that were paying attention, if we're going to tap into some of that Eurobond sinking fund, and we know that obviously we need to redeem some of that in November 2021, how have we asked the state to think about how it is that we'll balance the redeeming of the Eurobond next year and the funding of the 2021 budget?
There's a couple of ideas that we have on the table.
Brilliant.
Not yet finalized some of those ideas.
So watch this space.
Yeah, so watch this space.
Okay.
So we may look once again at the regional markets.
Okay.
Yeah, that remains on the card. So that means going to the JSC, because we've got a program there where we can still tap on and raise some funding from there.
Brilliant.
And then also things are improving in the international market space. So we may issue another Eurobond. So we may want to just extend this maturing Eurobond, take funds from the Eurobond that we raise, and then pay back that, just basically extend its maturity.
Brilliant.
But we haven't yet finalized the strategies around the 2021 Eurobond, but I think it may involve domestic markets, regional markets, and also the international market.
So B7, that is a massive hint from Nicholas Mukasa to invite him back when that particular plan has been finalized and is concrete, just so that we can give our viewers a decent update as to how it is that we're going to be rolling forward the Eurobond. But I'm extremely excited about the prospects for our country in terms of our ability to raise money internationally. Of course, it'll be a challenge, but we do have some pretty good advisors certainly on the deck. So let's see what it is that we can do. Nick, as we come to the conclusion of our conversation, would you have any sort of closing remarks for the viewers or for Allan Gray or institutional savers? We'd love to hear from you. What do you have to say?
James, I think I just want to say thank you very much for having me on the show. I think it was insightful. It was great chatting to you.
Brilliant.
I think for the viewers, the one thing I want to mention is that we, at our primary auctions where we raise money, we see a lot of we see participation from institutional investors. I think going forward, we would like to see more retail investors, your private individuals like your viewers on the show, come to the central bank. And I think one thing I want to mention here is that we're always excited when we talk to the men on the street. So please reach out to us, participate in our fundraising campaign.
Brilliant, fantastic. As usual, Allan Gray would love to continue partnering with the state, with the central bank, in educating our viewers. The returns from these bonds are actually normally very attractive from a real perspective. So after you take out inflation, you can easily earn 3 or 4%, depending on what Nick will be generating enough to offer you. But certainly from an Allan Gray perspective, we will certainly keep our clients and our viewers up to date when this particular program comes up. Thank you so much for joining us on this third episode of B7 with Allan Gray. I was extremely honored that the central bank allowed Nick to come over, and please tune in for the next one. We'll have another very special surprise for you. But up until then, keep well, keep safe, and please remember to social distance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
As always, I've enjoyed your company. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the insights as much as I did. And I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Until then, stay safe.